We are back on the Everton Byline for episode 20. I am Matt Jones, your host. Joining me as ever is Paddy Boylan from The Athletic. Paddy, how are you after your trip to London this weekend? A fruitful day for the Blues. Really, really good.
Yeah, it was unexpectedly good, really, in terms of the outcome, the point. Obviously, it was a gritty point, and they didn't have much of the ball and really had to dig it out. But I think there is something to be said for defensive resilience, much improved performances from some individuals. Like I think that was James Tarkowski's best game in ages, probably this season, truth be told. And just coming away from a top ground, the ground of a top club, and they're kind of intact still. I mean, you look at the other games this season against equivalent opposition, maybe inferior opposition in Man United and Spurs and Everton shipped 4 goals in each of those games and really looked quite fragile. So this is a pleasing return to the defensive solidity maybe of last season. And I mean, if they could just do anything in attack, and I mean anything, they'd be absolutely fine, wouldn't they? But I think that they're now the lowest performers on XG in the league. They have the lowest XG total in the league, so they're creating the worst chances in the Premier League of any side. So I think that tells the story. But yeah, a positive day. I've actually just as well, Matt. I've got a list of all Everton's number 20s up here.
Well, do you know what? I was going to say, see how we can start with serious football chat when Everton actually do good things. But
yeah,
this bit of the show has sort of got its own little cult following now, I think. People actually enjoy it. But have you got any favourites from that list of number 20s, Paddy, you want to go through?
I mean, there's some interesting names in here. Like Neil Maupay, Dele Alli, Cenk Tosun, Bernard, Davy Klaassen, Brian Oviedo, who I liked. Bit of a cult hero. Loved, obviously, the goal against Manchester United to secure Everton's first win there in ages. Pienaar, Matteo Ferrari, who was great.
Man after my own heart.
Joseph Yobo, Alex Cleland, who I once met in Chester Zoo unexpectedly. Got a photo with. I think I was quite underwhelmed. Alex Cleland's family were there, and clearly he was getting stopped quite often, being the huge global star that he is.
Did you recognise him, or was you like with your dad?
I mean, this was when I was a kid. This was at the time when he was playing for Everton. Like, I think if he walked past me in the street right now, I'd absolutely struggle. But back then, being like this massive young Evertonian, I knew who he was and kind of racing over for a picture. I don't think his family were particularly happy because they kept on getting stopped. So they had kind of like faces like thunder, but he was obliging and took his photo with me, and everyone moved on. Who else have we got? Tony Grant.
Yeah.
And then Robert Bartuta. So I quite like that list. It's an eclectic group. I'm going to say my favourite in there is Matteo Ferrari.
Well, I've got Ross Barkley as well on my list. You won number 20 for a bit.
Yeah.
I mean, that first few players to wear it, Maupay, Dele, Cenk, Bernard,
Klaassen.
I think in terms of players underperforming, it's not the best, is it? And also looking at that as well, Maupay, I think, has had 3 or 4 different squad numbers in his Everton career, because I think he wore 13 for a bit, didn't he? And then he had 12 when he came back. And obviously, he started with number 20 as well. So he's had 2 more squad numbers, I think, than he scored goals for us.
Well, he's also behind Wolves defender Craig Dawson in the list of all-time Everton goal scorers as well. Neil Maupay, I think, was on 1 solitary Everton goal against West Ham. I could have said, lovely goal actually, to secure a win, but is still lagging behind the defensive colossus that is Craig Dawson. So I mean, maybe
spoiler alert: Maupay makes an appearance next week as well. He wore 21 this season. That was his official assigned number this year.
We'll count this as our Maupay chat and be done with it.
We'll just go straight to the other lads next week then.
I don't think I've got the energy to do 2 Neil Maupay chats in a week.
Yeah, we'll take Neil Maupay as given. But yeah, there you go. There is your squad number section for those of you who enjoy that bit. I was saying to Paddy we could do a show about that. Maybe it's one for 2025, but we'll see. we'll just as well, we'll go through our usual admin. And a quite exciting one this week, actually. We are, as I say, every week sponsored by the Bridewell. And the Bridewell, in association with Guinness Paddy, are giving away 2 pairs of tickets. That's 4 in total for the game against Chelsea on Sunday. Being brutally honest, Paddy struggled to shift the ones for the Wolves game last time out, and I think that's maybe understandable given how Everton were playing. But we've scored 4, conceded none, got 4 points since then. Why should people want to go to this game on Sunday? Come on, I want you to sell it to the listeners.
Well, it's the final game before Christmas, an opportunity to celebrate the Yuletide period with your fellow Evertonians. No, I mean, being serious, the club is very close to having new owners. It should be, all being well, Everton's first game with new ownership. So, as it stands, provided that all goes through, I'm quite looking forward to going to Goodison on Sunday. I mean, I'm sure they'll drum that out of me in next to no time when the actual football takes place. But for now, I'm quite looking forward. There's a bit of expectation about going to Goodison on Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, if any of the Freakins are listening and they can't get their hands on tickets, maybe they need to enter as well. Could be a good way of getting them.
What, like a long lost Freakin cousin?
Yeah,
who was left off the list, but might just want to go anyway to see how things go.
Because I mean, that exec box at Goodison is small, so you might not be able to fit everybody in there. So, Dan, you're listening, you're after tickets. This might be a good way of getting hold of them because, as Paddy said, it could be a first one of a new era, so it might be in demand. But if you do fancy getting your old of these tickets, do get over to Twitter or Blue Sky or wherever you listen to us or pick up the podcast, retweet us, follow us, and you'll be entered into the draw. And should be a cracker. And listen, Chelsea are a great watch at the moment, aren't they, as well? In fairness, got some great players scoring loads of goals. So should be a good game, albeit their record at Goodison is pretty abject. So yeah, should be an interesting game.
The most entertaining team in the league at the moment. Maybe one of the least, but I won't say which one's which.
And that should mean it's going to be an all right game. So you will see an all right game at least. Like the entertainment factor of Chelsea and the stodginess of Everton could bring it towards being a good football match. So there you go. I think we've sold it for you there. So yeah, thanks to Guinness, thanks to Bridewell. If you want to get your hands on one of those pairs of tickets, retweet us or re-blue sky us. I'm not entirely sure what the terminology is for that quite yet. Make sure you follow the account. Like, subscribe, comment if you're on YouTube. Leave us a rating, leave us a review if you're listening on a podcast. Paddy, let's get stuck into our topics then. We'll do a bit on the game at the weekend because I know there's loads off the pitch coming up this week. And maybe not delve too much into the match itself because Les has done about 4 shows since the weekend and has done a great job of doing that on the Blue Room podcast. But just wanted to have a bit more an overall chat about Jordan Pickford, and I thought it might be quite fitting with the talk of eras and new eras and eras coming to a close potentially this week. I sort of said to you this morning in my Monday dog walking voice note to you that maybe Jordan Pickford is the most important player Everton have had in the Premier League era. And I sort of thought it in my head, and when I said it out loud, I thought, maybe not. Maybe that is a little bit silly to be saying. But the more I thought about it today, the more I reckon he might be. And, we're talking about the Farhad Moshiri. You've seen a lot of people today sort of sharing the signings of the era, the weirdest moments of the era, which we're sort of going to get. But I think Jordan Pickford, and I was looking back at some of the goalkeepers we were linked with at the time when we were linked with Pickford, and Joe Hart was obviously one, wasn't he? David Marshall was another name in there after doing all right at Cardiff. And you think it could have gone a different way, couldn't it? And in the end, we got Pickford. He was young. He came in and did really well straight away. He's had his, obviously, trials and tribulations. But in terms of keeping Everton afloat in this league over the last few years, I think he has been the driving force, if you can call a goalkeeper the driving force. So I'm happy with my theory that I sent to you today that Jordan Pickford is Everton's most important player of the Premier League era. And I think after a ropey start to the season, he's arguably playing as well as he has at any point for us too.
Yeah, I think that's a fair shout. I mean, we're saying most important player of the Premier League era for Everton, not necessarily the best player to perform for Everton in the Premier League era. And I think the answer to that second part would probably be different. But in terms of contribution and in terms of how important those contributions were to the overall picture, then I think you're probably hard pushed to look beyond Pickford. I mean, we've now had 3 successive relegation battles already, in which he has been arguably the key player. Sometimes there have been moments from Richarlison or Dwight McNeil or Decore, but in terms of consistency over that 3-year period, Pickford's been Everton's standout player and has performed in all the really big moments. Like, he has to save that ball against Chelsea under Frank Lampard, or Everton are in serious trouble. Think back to the deficit they had going into the game that day. They were in danger of getting cut adrift at the bottom. They had to win the game. Think back as well to the Leicester City penalty where he saves from James Maddison. I mean, the difference between the two teams at the end of the season was 2 points, and Leicester were 2-1 up at the break. It would have been 3 if Maddison had scored. Are Everton getting back into that game at 3-1 away from home? Arguably not. So I think you're right. I think he's not the best, but the most important player of certainly far of Moshiri's tenure, and probably just the Premier League era in general for Everton. And he did have a poor start by his standards to the season. I think that was typified by the mistake he made against Tottenham when he was closed down by Son, second match of the campaign. And I wonder how much of that was just a bit of burnout, a bit of, like, unlike most of the others in the Everton squad, he had to go again during the summer. There was no respite. Plays for England in the Euros, does very well in the main, but obviously suffers the setback of losing the final, which must have been a big deal. And I think he plays a bit of the final pre-season friendly before he's thrust back into Premier League action with minimal breaks. And unsurprisingly, maybe in hindsight, he slumped. But I think that last few weeks, not just Pickford, but the defence in general, Man United aside, has been a lot stronger. So I thought he was outstanding on Saturday. I thought he was my man of the match. Tarkowski excellent as well. Fullbacks decent against tough opposition. But I think there's some moments in there. I mean, for me, the best save is the one from Saka early in the second half, where Saka volleys it down to Pickford's left, and it's kind of a really quick, agile, instinctive save at a really important moment in the game. I did wonder in the first half how he and Tarkowski had managed to divert Odegaard's chance over the bar, but I actually think that goes in without the block from Tarkowski in the first place. I mean, so those two were crucial. Branthwaite a little bit jittery, I thought, around them, but Everton are now benefiting from the same core lining up regularly that played last season when they had the fourth best defence. Pickford, Young, Mikolenko, and the two centre-backs, Tarkowski and Branthwaite. They look much better there and kept out a very good Arsenal teams. Jordan Pickford, Everton's most important player of the Premier League era, as crowned by Matt Jones, particularly. If anybody wants to,
come on! You can't just make that case and then just farm it onto me. I mean, I'm happy to stand by it. To be honest, I mean,
yeah, that's right.
Who else are you putting in the frame? You could say like Duncan early on, in the 90s, in terms of just giving the club an identity, perhaps. Tim Cahill's probably going to be in there as well. You could have Baines just for being consistent, but
you've got to have Kevin Campbell.
Kevin Campbell as well, of course. Yeah, obviously he was brilliant tribute to him at the weekend. But I just think Kevin Campbell did it once, didn't he? It was like lightning in a bottle when he first came in, and he probably in that spell did more maybe than Pickford did in any of his seasons to keep Everton afloat single-handedly, if that makes sense. Like it was more in a short space of time, whereas Pickford's done it for 4 seasons. This is probably his 4th season now. And you look, I know that the club got a bit of stick today for putting out that tweet, didn't they, about the clean sheets, most in Europe and that sort of thing. But you go back through some of those games, and it's not like we're keeping the teams from having chances, and he's not having to make saves. He's still there as that kind of impassable last line of defence. You go back to the Newcastle game with Gordon's penalty. You go to West Ham when he makes that save from Ings' deflected shot late on. The Saka one you mentioned at the Emirates at the weekend. They're not run-of-the-mill saves that normal goalkeepers make. And I think while with Jordan, maybe you lose a little bit sometimes where he doesn't command his box quite as well. He's not as good as some other really tall goalkeepers under the high ball. I mean, you lose a little bit with that, but you gain so much more with those stops like the one you saw at the weekend with Saka, where it is about. I think for everything of a goalkeeper, it's like say someone like I was watching Spurs, like someone like Fraser Forster just doesn't get down to that shot because he's just a bigger,
Big
more
lummet.
lumbering sort of goalkeeper. Whereas Pickford in those shots which are like close to the keeper, which can sometimes just flash past, flash past the goalkeeper from a striker before you even realise. And no one's going to look on and say, well, you should have saved that because the shot's so much power. I think Pickford sort of makes them look routine because he is so dynamic and so good at just getting down to them when they're quite close to him.
Yeah, he's more agile, and I think he's got better reflexes. The instinctive stuff with Pickford always tends to be really good and a strong point. I'd argue actually it's sometimes when he has more time to think about it that it's maybe more problematic. The other part of this, and it's a lot harder to quantify in terms of metrics, but it's just that ability to turn up in all the big moments. So like that Chelsea game, like that Leicester City game, like the recent matches where Everton have needed to get points.
A lot of derbies, Paddy, as well. Like I know we haven't won loads of them, but like he's been our best player in a few draws. He made some big saves in the one last year in the COVID derby one at Anfield. He was amazing that night, and that was kind of the catalyst for him becoming the product we're looking at now as well, isn't it?
Yeah, that I think there's a save from like a dipping Jordan Henderson volley. That's great in that COVID derby at Anfield. So it's the big moments. Very rarely does he fail to turn up when Everton need him, and you could see at the end on Saturday what it meant to him. I mean, it's only a draw, and obviously some people have their own thoughts on how much a draw anywhere should be celebrated. But it clearly meant a lot to Pickford, and he was kind of fist bumping the fans and congratulating teammates and looked like genuinely really happy about it. So a good day at the office, all things considered. A day at the office that I kind of expected to Everton to have more of under Dyche. Do you know that really gritty kind of like 25% possession, just go away and shut down a top team like that? Like so far this season, they've been like worryingly shaky on the road in particular, but this was positive. That doesn't fix everything. There's still a lot wrong with this team, but I think if they can do this, then you almost cover the bottom lines, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. And it's just about finding that extra bit, maybe against teams who aren't quite as good defensively, I suppose, isn't it? But yeah, it's a good start to December, and after that horror show United, that was 1st December, I suppose. But since then, 4 points from the 2 games is a good return. I don't think anyone would have turned their nose up at that. But we'll park that for now, Paddy, because off the pitch matters are going to take focus certainly before the game at the weekend. Obviously, we are in the final throes now, it would seem, of the Friedkin group going through the takeover Everton. A lot of reports last week, some saying that the Premier League application had come through, some saying it hadn't yet. I don't think it really matters at this point. It feels like it's inevitable that's going to happen. And the general consensus is that it's going to be this week that Dan Friedkin gets his coronation and comes in and takes over the Toffees. Just from your point of view, as we sit here now on Monday night, probably should timestamp that because things come very quickly. How are things looking from that point of view? And you sort of hinted at it there. All being well, it looks like this could be done before the weekend.
Yeah, very, very optimistic. I don't think there's much to do at all. And again, there is still stuff to do, but it's relatively minuscule and is unlikely to give anybody any headaches. I think the reporting at the end of last week into the start of this week has almost been an exercise in semantics. Like final approval technically hasn't come through, but everyone knows that the Premier League has effectively said yes to this. And then the final step of that is for an independent panel to scrutinise the Premier League's decision-making processes with regards to the Everton takeover. And that normally takes 7 days, there or thereabouts. So, I mean, you can do the sums in your head and work out, I think it was Thursday or Friday, when that came through, or that indication came through, I should say. So we shouldn't be far away. And that inevitably leads us to the potential for something to happen before Christmas, which was in fairness, always the expectation. I remember the pod we did when this news of the Freakins coming back to the table first broke, and the very first indication we had was before Christmas, probably just before Christmas, and let's get in as soon as possible. And it looks like that's going to be right. Let's see how the next few days go. But yeah, I think it's overwhelmingly positive, the situation at present.
Yeah, it's going to be weird what it does for the fan base and the club, isn't it? Because it's such a rare thing to be taken over. Because I remember when Farhad Moshiri came in initially, wasn't it a takeover? Was it? He was the majority shareholder from that point of view, and I think there was excitement about what he could do and the money he could bring. But like at the time, you were kind of going through a bit of a weird phase with Martin as well. And obviously he was sacked not long after it. But
yeah,
I'm just wondering because it's not like signing a player or bringing in a new manager or even changing director of football. It's something like so much more like holistic and massive for the football club. Like I don't know. It's interesting that you sort of said at the start about the game on Sunday, and it's the first one of the new era. Like that's not even something I'd really thought about as being have like an impact on the atmosphere or anything, if you get what I mean. Because it's not really something that immediately impacts on pitch matters, but it's like in a funny sort of way, it's bigger than that, isn't it? It's like we're talking about if this hadn't have done and we've been done and we were still in a situation where Farhad Moshiri was still looking for buyers going into 2025, then the club's issues aren't just PSR, finances, staying up. It's a lot more of like an existential thing, isn't it?
Well, it has been for a while, hasn't it?
Yeah.
But Farhad Moshiri said quite publicly, I think it was near enough 2 years ago now, that the situation in front of the club was an existential one. He said that himself. We're not putting words in his mouth there, and what he meant by that was his money had dried up and the club became increasingly reliant on outside sources to keep things going. It's been a really tough period for Everton, and they've just about managed to get through. So, I mean, there's relief here. I'm sure there'll be jubilation, but I think the first emotion for most people will probably just be relief that this is done. The tone of this is quite interesting though as well, and like from what I'm told, I don't think there's going to be huge fanfare accompanying any announcement. I don't think it's going to be bells and whistles and big press conferences before the Chelsea game and everything else. And that they may be famous last words. That's just what I'm hearing right now. I think while there'll be a lot of satisfaction that this has done, and a lot of optimism, I think people acknowledge that Everton is still in a pretty difficult position on the pitch at the moment. They're still, for all intents and purposes, trying to pull clear of a relegation battle. And I think there's going to have to be a focus on the pitch as well. So I think what we see in the form of comms will strike that balance over the next week or so, all being well. And then maybe it's probably only when we get into the new year and things start to unravel in a positive sense in terms of what the vision is, people start talking a bit more, that maybe the true extent of this really hits home. But I mean, hugely positive, just in the sense that they've found the new investment they needed to keep this going. And all of a sudden you have potential new owners, hopefully in situ soon. You have a new stadium that you move into at the start of next season. There is a situation on the pitch that needs to be addressed. But you're getting a lot closer to being able to look forward to the things that you should be able to look forward to. I mean, let's be honest. Like, how often did you think about the new stadium, for example, last year? As good as it is and as important it's going to be, when you've got the wolf at your door right now, you don't think about anything else, really, do you?
Well, I used to think about it, and I think I've said this on these pods, certainly on the Blue Room before, there's like a negative. Like, and that's horrible to even think about it, because it was one of those at one point where, I'd look at it and think, if we're a club in dire financial straits, how are we going to, every time you go past on the train or driving back in the Manchester taxi, how are we going to pay for that thing? It's amazing, and it's going to cost loads of money. And if we're in this situation, having been to Valencia relatively recently as well, Paddy, that wanted to delve in there. You look at their football club and the stadium they've built, and it's just there, not being used. They don't be able to pay for it to be finished. Yeah. And I suppose those deep, dark fears and that sort of fatalism does creep in when things like, I remember the appeals over the points deductions and the second one coming in, all that kind of stuff. I think they were the lowest points, and you feel like you're sort of trapped in this cycle of misery. And I think you've actually hit on it there. What I was trying to say a lot more eloquently, a lot more simply, in the sense that I feel like this is going to be announced, and I think it might just be a little bit underwhelming initially, so. but it's not. Like, and I think from what we've seen and what we've spoken about with the Freaking group and what goes on at Roma, I don't feel like they're going to be on the phone to radio stations or doing press conferences like you said. I think this is going to be a huge shift in tone and comms compared to certainly the early years of Farhad Moshiri, where
professionalism.
Absolutely. Like it, and that's kind of what you want, isn't it? Like, and I think as much as I'm sure they'll have a statement. I'm sure there'll be a statement from Everton and maybe some words from Farhad Moshiri in there as well. I think going back to one of the earlier podcasts we've done this year, and we were sort of saying that you kind of don't want to hear from the owners, really. You want things to be steady, you want things to be ticking along. You don't want to have to sit there asking for communication about everything that goes on at the football club and why things are happening. You kind of just want to see the things they're doing, understand why they're doing them, and just kind of keep that distance, because as much as factors of this are interesting, and it's, I've certainly personally delved into aspects of football finance and football financial journalism over the last few years that I never wanted to. It's for me, it's about the football. I'm sure for the majority of people listening to this, it's about the football as well. So it's I think it might just be a tinge underwhelming, but I think it, the relief that is going to be behind that is going to be tangible too, and hopefully we can move forward. And we are going to be moving forward, Paddy, from an era that spanned 8 years in Farhad Moshiri, and we thought maybe essentially being the last byline of the Moshiri era, we'd take a bit of a look back on it. How long have you been at the Athletic for now? Were you at the Athletic for the entirety of Moshiri's tenure?
Since August 2019.
So you've had 5 years, just over 5 years, working for the Athletics Everton correspondents. And
what 5 years they've been there.
Moshiri's been there for all of them. How do you reflect on his tenure as Everton? Because I imagine from a journalistic point of view, if you had no dog in this fight and there's no danger of the club being run into the ground financially and relegated and all those sorts of things, I imagine it's been quite an entertaining few years, because there's been so many stories. He's not media shy. He's done lots of bizarre things. But he's obviously turned that back in the last few years. But I think his legacy is ultimately, it could be the stadium. But I think when you're looking at him and what he said and how he's acted, going back to what I was saying today about people on social media, looking back through the maddest Moshiri memories of the last 8 years, there is a catalogue of them, isn't there? We could do another podcast entirely on all the bizarre things that Moshiri has done and said. And I think just leaving that circus behind will hopefully be nice for the next few years at least.
Yeah, I mean, in hindsight, the very early comment about why Lukaku left Everton when Moshiri was speaking at the AGM should have probably set off warning signs. Well, it did. But
so how early was that? Was that 2000? That would have been 2017, 18, would it?
That's very early, because Lukaku leaves
2016
summer, doesn't he?
Yeah.
So that's very early. But that was remarkable in itself, and you can find all the quotes like that throughout Moshiri's time. I think you've got to assess him based on what he set out to do, what he said he was going to do on arrival, and his plan was apparently to return Everton to past glories, to break down that glass ceiling that had existed and get Everton back in the elite. And he's not done that. But not only has he not done that, Everton have gone backwards alarmingly at times, at a rate of knots, despite initial substantial investment. And I think obviously there's not been a strategy, well, there's not been a coherent strategy for a long time. And it was definitely the case early doors. It was just a complete mess which came through. And yeah, that might be interesting to journalists. They might give us stuff to write about, but like, don't forget, I also like care about the club. Grew up supporting the club. Often, I just wanted them to grow up. To go back to the phrase we were using the other week, and start to do things more professionally. In a lot of sporting ways, it's been a colossal failure. And let's be honest, when we're talking about some of the stuff we were talking about earlier, such as just getting by financially and just getting things ticking over with the stadium, making sure Everton just survive relegation, then you realise how bad it's got. The other part of the legacy, of course, is the stadium, which has been a massive attraction for new investors, including the Freaking Group. The gamble was there in that this was a terrible time, really, given the geopolitical situation, to build the thing. But if they'd waited any longer, I mean, most people I speak to think that right now, if you're building Bramley-Moore from scratch, it's probably going to cost significantly over £1 billion. Significantly over £1 billion. And Everton have done it much cheaper than that. For a while, kind of a millstone around the club's neck, because it was trying to fund everything at a time when Moshiri's cash resources had dried up. But then it also helped save them in the end as well. So he's delivered that, and he played a big role. I mean, he financed, in the absence of a financing package, he financed a lot of it out of his own pocket early doors, and just wasn't able to as we progressed through. Obviously, the plan for the final tranche of funding was going to be for USM and Megaphone to sponsor through a stadium naming rights deal, and then that would give Everton access to about £200 million in cash. But they had to divert from that plan when Russia decided to invade Ukraine. So I mean, he's been unlucky. He's made poor decisions, and he's been poorly advised, and the club's been a mess. But he's been unlucky too. I think we have to give him credit for the new stadium, but it's a checkered legacy at best, and I'd argue a pretty poor one, all things considered.
It's bizarre, isn't it? Because I think the stadium, whatever way you want to look at it, and taking my commentary about thinking it could be a negative with the tongue-in-cheek way it was meant to be taken, like that has been such an unqualified. It's been such a qualified success. Even like there's no aspect of it, I think, where anyone could really do too much complaining. It feels like 95% of the stuff they've done around that, at least, has been well received, and the result is looking like it's going to be there for all to see. And I just find it difficult to look at all that, put the stadium stuff in a box and say that has all been done so well under his watch, and then you put the football stuff in another box and think, how is the same fella who was effectively oversaw this stadium build and helped get this on track, also overseeing this thing over here, this 8 years of colossal chaos and deterioration from the football front? Because they don't. I know people have got different skills and have got different backgrounds they're in, but they don't add up. Like, one is the working and the vision of someone who's clearly a capable operator, who's has got a vision. The other one is just the total antithesis. And it just, from your point of view, what is it about the football side that went so spectacularly wrong compared to what's happened with the stadium, which has gone so spectacularly right? Fingers crossed.
Yeah, I think it's easy to address the football situation. I think basically what happened is he just wanted to be involved. And the analogy I've used before, Matt, is that me and you play FIFA Ultimate Team or Football Manager, but billionaires like Fahd Moshiri can do that in real life with football clubs like Everton, and there can be some disastrous consequences. I think he was attracted to the idea of owning a Premier League club, and loved the idea of being able to get on the phone and negotiate deals. And he was obviously at Arsenal a lot before coming to Everton, and was at certain points fascinated by the idea of buying some of those players he watched at Arsenal for Everton, without really thinking that, well, this is years on. They're a shadow of the former selves, and that this really might not work. I don't think there was ever, like, even in the early stages, I remember people saying, to us that there wasn't much vision here. It wasn't, I want Everton to work from this model and do it that way. It was kind of a hodgepodge of everything. I mean, look at the different managers Everton have had. Like, you're going from Carlo Ancelotti and Ronald Koeman to Benitez and Allardyce and Marco Silva's in the middle and Sean Dyche is in there, Frank Lampard. I mean, like, he didn't pick every single one of those managers. He picked most of them. But they're all, most of them don't really correspond to each other, do they? These are kind of different competing visions. And I think that, together with there being directors of football and managers having input and agents having input and a scouting team and everything else, board, Bill Kenwright, obviously very kind of influential at times. I think it just meant that there was just so many cooks around the process that things got warped and distorted and just didn't make sense ultimately for long spells. I actually think the club's been at its most coherent in like a strategy point of view in that period where Moshiri effectively has had no money and not been able to be involved. At least you can kind of see what they're attempting to do with a sustainable model. And then on the stadium side, I mean, you've got people there that are experienced in the games, like Colin Chong, the interim CEO. This is his sphere. This is his area of expertise: stadium project management. They've delegated and they've left it mostly to those people, with Moshiri just being, for want of a better phrase, a bit of a cash cow in the early days. And I think that's why it's worked better. The problem is it's a football club, isn't it? So the stadium's great and hopefully will help on the football side in the years to come through extra revenues. But we have to assess the football performance as well, and that's why it is a checkered record at best. Of course, he deserves credit for the stadium getting built and hopefully a massive part of Everton's future.
Yeah, the interference stuff on the football front I've always found interesting. Like, I just wonder why nobody who's close to him, maybe people who are close to him, maybe kind of egged him on a little bit in their own interests, or people at the football club, like directors of football, or even managers to an extent. And maybe this has happened, but I've not just kind of said, for the want of a better word, back off. And because there were so many times, I remember Marcel Brands coming in and being excited about him as a director of football, and he got put on the board. And it was a bit like, at the time, I was like, oh yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense to do that. And it was a bit like, it's just weird. Like, I don't think that ever happened at a Premier League football club since or beforehand. And those sorts of decisions, you're thinking, if you're going out to get this fella and then you're putting him on the board, you clearly rate him that highly. Why are you not just letting him crack on with his job? And it's that constant juxtaposition of him obviously thinking, right, I need to get this amazing manager in, this one like Carlo Ancelotti, or I need to get this amazing director of football in Marcel Brands, and then getting them in and not letting them sort of just crack on with the job to an extent. And I don't know if anyone did or around any of your reporting, Paddy, whether you found out when everyone's ever said to listen for, right, just leave it. Let them crack on, because it sort of feels like, I don't know, if I want to tar everybody who's been involved in this, it feels like a lot of the time people have kind of just been acting in their own interests, and would not really say to Moshiri, just let me crack on with the job, because they want to keep theirs to a certain degree.
Yeah, I know there was substantial opposition when it came to the appointment of Benitez, and that was at a football level as well as a board level. I think you'll quite famously remember that Marcel Brands was the only member of the hierarchy that wasn't pictured or quoted in any of the Benitez announcement stuff, because he wasn't there. And obviously that was a very unpopular decision internally even. So I think it's quite hard sometimes to overrule the money man. At the end of the day, it's his money, and he has been used as a bit of a cash cow at Everton and over the years. And if it's his money, he gets a bit of a say. I mean, going back to board appointments, by the way, it's only fairly recently when they appointed the transitional board. And Barrett Baxendale left, and Kenwright, obviously, he stayed on and then passed away, obviously. When they appointed that transitional board, that Moshiri went on the board at all. Now, if you can imagine, like, you've got a guy in predominantly based out of Monaco, who's not on the board, but you've got a board sitting in Liverpool. So even though there's a geographical disconnect, isn't there? I mean, people I've spoken to have said to me, like, he should have been on the board from day one, and it all should have been integrated, and everyone should have been looped in. And I just think at times people just didn't know what others were doing. And the Anthony Gordon situation, which is obviously fairly widely documented, that he was negotiating the transfer, but didn't turn up at training. And everyone here in Liverpool on Merseyside is thinking, well, why has he not turned up at training? Like, why is he slighting us like this? Obviously, some of Gordon's behaviour, I don't think was great. But the extra context that we need to include is that he was there with the owner trying to negotiate his exit to go to Newcastle. There's the disconnect. That if any anecdote, I think, explains the disconnect, I think it's that, and that's been the problem. Whereas I get the sense that aside from Moshiri's cash injections at various points, the new stadium operation, the new stadium development has largely been run out of the Liver building by Colin Chung, initially by Denise Barrett-Baxendale, the former CEO, people like that. It was done out of Liverpool, and I think that's a difference.
Yeah. And just finally, Paddy, have you got a favourite, or maybe favourite's not the right word, but standout Farhad Moshiri bizarre moments from down the years? You mentioned the Lukaku one, which I think actually led to legal action, didn't it, in the end, from Rom against Moshiri. I can't remember actually how it came of that.
It's shaky ground, isn't it? It's really shaky ground in a number of different ways. And obviously Lukaku's team more or less immediately issued a statement saying it was a load of nonsense. I mean, if you're asking me for kind of standout memories, I think some of the phone calls to Jim White, and like some of that's so farcical. Like you've got like Jim White reading off like notes,
iPhone notes, wasn't it? Yeah. Do you know what? That's how Everton should announce the takeover. They should put the takeover statement on an iPhone notes page, screenshot it like Jim White used to do from his statements from Farhad, and just put it out on the website. That'd just tie the Moshiri era in a nice little bow, and allow us all to collectively move on together.
You're wasted in podcasting and editing, Matt. You've got a career as a
PR.
Or PR, or as a burgeoning kind of club content guy.
There you
go.
Just
giving them their idea there. If they do that over the next few days, then I mean, we were speaking about legal challenges there that you've been.
But I this is a piece today from Chris Beasley, obviously with Vitor Pereira going to Wolves. Looking back at his very, very bizarre phone call to Sky Sports, where he was on for 20 minutes talking about how he should be the Everton manager. I think he called Godson Park. I think he said that 1860 Munich got relegated because they had no money, and then said they did have money. It's just that was a very, very bizarre moment as well. I also liked when Farhad at one of the AGMs said that he has sometimes he phones up Jim White after drinking too much wine. Just there are some of them you look back on it and laugh and think, what on earth was he playing at? There are others that you mentioned there, like the Lukaku one, very serious. The stuff that happened around that Southampton game as well. Obviously, the headlock and all that. That was awful to sort of go through, and as a fan base.
In fairness, there, Matt, if we're being completely fair to Moshiri, I don't think he was complicit.
Oh yeah, I just mean in terms of the era, like of his tenure in charge of the football club.
It's been incredibly turbulent, whether it's been his fault at times or not. And I think there's been a bit of everything, by the way. There's been problems of his making, problems of others making, problems not of Everton's making at times. All of it just kind of morphed and merged into this one kind of big amorphous blob of just badness, poorness, crap.
I was so convinced he was going to be the person that inspired us to, and I think it took a couple of years for me to kind of think, maybe everything this fella says isn't spot on. Maybe he isn't the person I want to own the football club, because I think everyone gets that little grace period, don't they? And I think, I remember that some of the AGMs and some of the wacky stuff he was saying, and people were were eating it up and laughing and, and being in the pub and the Philharmonic after one of them and sort of waxing lyrical about, this guy's he's the real deal. He's the real deal who's going to take us forward. And I think it was perhaps when Benitez was appointed that it was like completely confirmed that this was just never ever going to work out. I think that was probably the final straw from my point of view.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough.
Okay, mate, we'll wrap it up there anyway. Potentially, hopefully, the last byline of the Moshiri era. If you're listening to this on podcast, do leave us a rating, do leave us a review. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit like, hit subscribe, and leave us a comment. If you want to win tickets to that Chelsea game for the first game, potentially, asterisk next to that, of the Freaking era, do give us a retweet or blue sky. Make sure you follow the account. And we'll be back again next week. Paddy, starting with Neil Maupay again, number 21. And probably talk a bit more about the takeover in Chelsea as well, most likely. But that has been Byline 20. Up the toppies. We'll catch you again very soon.